Welcome to the Navic Gaming Podcast, where it is our mission to explore the business and future of video games. We bring together the industry's brightest builders, investors, and thinkers to keep a pulse on current events, dissect emerging trends in games, share lessons learned, and have a great time. This podcast is also part of Navic's growing ecosystem, which ranges from free and premium research to consulting and advisory services. For more information, visit www.navic.co. This episode is brought to you by Heroic Labs, which powers some of the world's biggest games with its Heroic game stack. Its composable products are Nakama, the open source backend game server, Hero, the game development framework for all your live service game features, including the complexity of managing offline mode, Satori, the world-class live ops product for maximizing monetization and retention, and lastly, the Heroic Cloud to provide massive scalability. After nearly 10 years of operation, thousands of studios trust Heroic Labs to help them focus on their games and not worry about game tech or scaling for success. To learn more and reach out, make sure to visit heroiclabs.com or check out the link in the show notes. This episode is brought to you by Neon. For the first time in our industry, developers can finally have their own D2C channels to save on App Store fees and build closer relationships with players. But there's a catch. Selling direct means either building complex infrastructure yourself or choosing among legacy providers whose inexperience in games or questionable reputations pose real risk to your business. Luckily, there's Neon, the D2C platform built for games. As a merchant of record with customizable web shops optimized for conversion and modern APIs that let you use your existing LiveOps tools, Neon is trusted by some of the biggest names in gaming to help you sell direct without the typical overhead. To start selling direct and finally take control over your full player experience, simply head to neonpay.com or check out the link in the show notes. And with that, let's jump into the episode.
Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Devin Becker, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Sam Aune, gaming analyst at Sensor Tower. And Sensor Tower is an intelligence platform that empowers companies to understand consumer behavior and market performance across mobile apps and more. Great platform. We use it all the time. Definitely a good shout out for that. But today we're going to explore the state of gaming industry as outlined in a very recent Sensor Tower report that came out not too long ago, and just kind of focusing on some of the major shifts. But why don't we just start out by talking about you, Sam, just for a second. So can you just give a quick overview of your background and what you do for Sensor Tower?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Sam, lead gaming insights analyst at Sensor Tower on our market insights team. So that basically means I lead our global gaming reports, blogs, gaming insights requests across the business. Before working at Sensor Tower, I worked in product and games for a few years. Before that, I was actually an English teacher in South Korea and Japan for a while. I'm also a lifelong gamer, so getting to watch the industry as part of this role it's basically a dream job for me.
Awesome. Could you just tell us quickly about the Sensor Tower report that you guys recently released, when you put it out, and maybe even just where people could find it?
Sure. Yeah, we just released our biggest report of the year, State of Gaming, last month. In prior years, it was the state of mobile gaming, since Sensor Tower was historically focused on mobile. But with our acquisition of Video Game Insights, or VGI as we like to call it, we were able to broaden the scope this year and turn it into a full state of gaming report across mobile, PC, and console. I don't know the exact URL off the top of my head, but I'm sure if you Google Sensor Tower State of Gaming, you'll be able to find it pretty quickly. So yeah, please take a look if you haven't. I'd love to hear anyone's thoughts on that.
Awesome. Yeah, and congrats on the Video Game Insights pickup that now covers console and PC as well. So it's pretty nice to have that all in one place. Definitely a fan of that, just because that is definitely hard to get good data on.
Yeah, so it seems it's great to have the new team on board. They're really excited to work with Carl and the rest of the team there.
Awesome. Why don't we just get into some of the bigger issues here? Of course, mobile is somewhat your bread and butter still. So why don't we just start with that? We'll cover some of the topics here. Maybe get a little more detail than the report does, or maybe some more analysis on what it covers. But the latest report notes that while mobile downloads are declining still, revenues remain relatively steady. Are games basically getting better at monetizing a smaller pool of players, or is there like a shift in the whale demographic? Like, how is that kind of working out at the moment?
Yeah, so unfortunately, Sensor Tower data doesn't currently let us break revenue down cleanly by cohorts like whales versus non-bears. I know that's really commonly asked for, so maybe we'll try to work towards it in the future, but currently it's hard for me to answer that with hard data. What I can say is that declining downloads don't actually necessarily mean fewer players. It just means that there's less demand for like a new game to play from a player perspective. So as the market matures and older games keep holding on to their audiences, many cases those players are investing more over time, makes those games harder to displace. There's those privacy changes that have made targeting high-value users more difficult, fewer downloads to be able to compete for. So it's harder for new games to break through, though not impossible by any means. But yeah, I do think that this means that the stories that mobile has become more mature, more incumbent-driven market. There's more consolidation towards the top. And it kind of makes it harder to scale new games. But yeah, many of the top games, I would say, are definitely monetizing their existing player bases better than ever. So allowing revenue to kind of hold flat year over year despite decreasing downloads.
Is there any specific strategies you're seeing in live ops or retention or anything like that that's helping with that monetization, or like any additional insight you could provide? Doesn't necessarily have to have hard data, just maybe some more insight into why that's happening still.
Yeah, sure. At a market level, one trend we're seeing in live ops is a shift towards progression events that drive short to midterm engagement and retention. So we just recently picked up another acquisition from Playliner, which covers the live ops, and they go in and document all sorts of different events and strategies that are going on inside of live ops games. And so I went and looked inside of their library of different events that they cover. And yeah, it looks like there's just more progression events as a percentage of new events that are coming out year over year, as opposed to monetization or other kinds of events. And many of the Starbucks examples, progression and monetization are pretty tightly linked, actually, in a lot of these really, really strong events. Historically, the Battle Pass has been around forever. It's probably the most widespread version of that, but it's not the only model. We're also seeing time-limited events recently, trending, building around milestones that unlock additional rewards or offers. That kind of sits between a Battle Pass and a piggy bank almost. They give players clearer reward breakpoints than a piggy bank, but they don't have a free track. So maybe it's a little bit easier to balance from an economy perspective on the free-to-play side. Another big trend I'd call out is social, not just in retention among mobile, really across almost every major metric and in platform even. So if we're talking about social gaming on mobile, I would say Roblox is really clear cross-platform example, but most of its players are on mobile. But you also see things like in the biggest Forex games that really took over in 2025, alliance wars are a huge reason why players are retaining while they're paying. There's co-op events and casual, all sorts of different tournaments and so forth, putting aside the wave of social games on PC console even. But more and more, I would say social motivation is a core part of why players stick around and convert. And games that successfully build social systems into the core experience rather than treating them as a layer on top are generally in a much stronger position on retention, I would say.
That makes sense. I mean, one of the things I noticed too is, and you mentioned Forex and stuff like that, it was that it seems like some of these core, mid-core genres are strongly overtaking casual and especially hyper casual, with the whole shift in the market around monetizing players better, and retaining them, things like that, as opposed to acquiring new players and downloads increasing. Does this look like something where we could see a huge reduction in the casual market, or at the very least, maybe some crash in the hyper casual market more so than we saw first off when like the privacy changes happened?
Yeah, this is something we've been watching closely. I think people have been watching to see how these different changes on the market level have been affecting hyper casual specifically, in addition to the other product models as well. So yeah, the install is definitely declining across mobile more broadly. And I think for sure, a lot of hyper casual publishers have faced real challenges over the past few years. But one of the most interesting things I found while creating the state of gaming is that hyper casual activity is actually not moving in the same direction as the rest of the market in 2025. Hyper casual downloads are up, while most other product models saw downloads fall. Time spent was up for hyper casual, and maybe most surprisingly, actually in-app purchase revenue was up quite a bit as well. Hyper casual in-app purchase revenue reached almost $700 million worldwide in 2025, which is up 130% year over year. And that may sound strange if you're familiar at all with Sensor Tower's taxonomy, because hyper casual is still primarily an ad monetized category by our definition. But our Game IQ team does allow for some limited IAP behavior in hyper casual things like ad removal, starter packs, currency bundles, and those seem to be growing meaningfully. So when you look at the market level data, it doesn't really point to an imminent crash. It actually might suggest that hyper-casual is adapting better than expectations. My own little theory is that hyper-casual has always been a kind of mechanics discovery lab that has to constantly try to find the next sticky loop or die trying. So if sheer execution is increasingly becoming a game only the biggest publishers can win, that means everyone else has to lean more into innovation to break through. And in that environment, hyper-casual may actually be better positioned structurally than casual or even some mid-core segments.
Well, it's definitely interesting to know. Like, it's obviously one that people tend to panic about. It's good to know that there's like some level of stickiness there, even if it just requires constant innovation from the developers, both on the monetization side and the game mechanic side. Forex, you mentioned a little bit
Yeah.
earlier. That was a big growth. I mean, obviously, it's a genre that's been around for a little while, but seems to be doing very well and growing despite a lot of the others. Um,
Oh, yeah.
why is this specific genre resisting like the general trends, especially with it kind of being a somewhat saturated genre? Like, there's quite a few entries. Some of them have been around for a while, some of them not. Some of them have been around for over a decade. What is it that's about this genre that's helping just drive all that? Maybe there's a variety of things.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I would say that Forex strategy growth is primarily driven by a new wave of Forex strategy games, primarily by Eastern and even like Chinese, Hong Kong, Singaporean kind of publishers. And a lot of the older ones are not seeing the same level of growth, unfortunately. And there's two reasons I think this big Forex wave is been taking over in 2025. First of all, Forex strategy, some of the strongest monetization in mobile. Period. I would say these games layer progression systems on top of social structures and create real pressure to keep spending, keep showing up. You're not just trying to beat your opponent in these games like other competitive games. You're trying to not let your lines down. It's a really strong retention and monetization driver. Second, I would say the category has gotten really good at building ad-friendly mechanics into the actual game. So Last War has their shooter gameplay that they put in all their ads. Kingshot has their tower defense thing. The newer games are continuing that pattern by combining some proven ad-friendly gameplay hooks. One game that comes to mind is Last Asylum Plague. It's a new Forex that's been seeing some real traction. They take gameplay from the My Perfect Hotel hybrid casual and use that in their gameplay and in their ads to really drive downloads, which is really interesting to see. So yeah, these all have these ad-friendly gameplay hooks, and they combine that, of course, with the mature Forex backend. So these games are, I would say, they're a little easier to market. They have these mechanics that are just instantly readable and creative. Then you add the fact that many of the top publishers, as I mentioned earlier, are these large Chinese or Eastern publishers that execute extremely well on live ops and ad creative, and it starts to make sense why a lot of these Forex games have exploded despite the broader decline. But what I don't think people should take away, though, is that this is some magic unique to Forex. I think a lot of these lessons really should be transferable. There's no reason deep social monetization can't work outside Forex. Ad-friendly gameplay has existed forever in hyper-casual and casual, but the real story, I think, is that Forex has really been better than most genres at innovating on these elements and combining the ingredients. And that, to me, points to a broader problem. It feels like innovation in mobile, at least at the mechanics level, it feels a little bit slower than it used to. It's kind of a broad statement, but it's hard not to notice how much of the casual category, for example, still clusters around like match 3, merge, traditional casino hooks like slots. So I would ask, rather than why is Forex winning, it's why more genres aren't really borrowing this playbook as effectively.
That makes sense. It does also have like sort of these long-term hooks with good seasonal cycling, things like that, that seem to work pretty well. That might be a little harder for some of those genres to adapt to, but obviously, like these aren't things that are, as you said, specific to Forex. They're just ones that they've refined and polished like over the last decade or two. And as you mentioned, leading to some of these new games, continuing to sort of build and innovate on top of that, which as you mentioned, we're not seeing from the casual ones. In regards to that,
Yeah.
like, do you think we're seeing any kind of shifting toward, and this is something that's been discussed for quite a while, this is not like a new thing, but this sort of shift to where the increase of mid-core and core players on mobile, like there was, in the earlier days of casual, there was this big rejection of mobile from what we call core players or gamers generally,
Yeah.
but that over time, it seems like it's shifted towards accepting a bit more. This, we're seeing like these very like high quality AAA style of games now that are like third person shooters, first person shooters, that are like, what you'd see on PC, sometimes PC ports.
For
Like
sure.
even Rainbow Six Mobile kind of trying to make a push recently as a
Yeah.
sort of port from PC game. Do you think there's a trend towards core gamers at all, or at least like a growing acceptance, rather than a cannibalization of casual, just a growth of that audience?
Yeah, it's definitely a trend we're seeing over time as more core games make pushes, and it does feel like the core audience has become more accepting of mobile games for sure. But looking at the games that we were just talking about, the Forex strategy games and just strategy in general, I guess, I would say that it doesn't feel so much like we're turning towards core in that specific instance. It's maybe more, they're targeting the casual and maybe hyper casual audience even a lot better. I think a lot of these Forex strategy games, when you play them, there's a lot of different progression systems. There's a lot of elements involved, but they don't actually demand super strategic decision making moment to moment. If you're playing StarCraft in 2005 and then you move to Last War Survival, it's quite different, right? uh, but what seems more likely to me is that these games have really become good at requiring broader audiences, including more casual ones. I actually took a look at Sensor Tower audience insights on this. One useful feature we have on there is called personas, which these are groups that we create based on broader mobile behavior. Things like, so personas will include things like core gamers, casual gamers, PC gamers, console gamers, also non-gaming personas, of course, like e-readers, world travelers. So I looked at a cohort of this recent wave of Forex strategy games. Top persona, not surprising, core gamers, which is our persona for specifically mid-core gamers on mobile. Number 2 is actually hyper-casual gamers. And it might be a little bit surprising at first, but to me, it actually makes a lot of sense when you look at their ad creative strategy. It really feels like their creative tactics have a lot inspired from hyper-casual. They have, really strong onboarding and quest systems whenever they get into the game. They use these bright, approachable art styles that travel well across Eastern and Western markets, and the gameplay hooks, again, whenever you watch it, it does really remind you, I think, of a lot of hyper-casual ads. So to me, this suggests that these games specifically aren't really becoming more core. They're borrowing a lot of the hyper-casual style acquisition tactics and successfully pulling some of that audience into core.
That makes sense when you see the ads, like when you have that sort of transitionary period as well. Like something like Whiteout Survival was a good example of a game where it kind of tricks you. And we did see a trend of that, especially 4X games. Where like 4X games are intimidating for the casual or hyper casual audience. So let's kind of ease them into it and show them that it isn't StarCraft on mobile. That you can work your way into this. And I think that's interesting sort of insight that hyper casual has been sort of pulled into this a little bit as well, along with what you said around hyper casual finding ways to adapt. It just kind of makes you think that is an audience, regardless of whether or not the market is adapting to that audience seems to remain. And it's just how well can you get them in, get them playing, get them monetizing, all that stuff. And not thinking about them as an audience that's like a wave that comes and goes. Shifting over to PC though, that was a big growth area. And of course, having the video game insights helps with that quite a bit to be able to pull that kind of data alongside console. But PC seem to be seeing like probably some of the biggest growth. And I know there's been a lot of attention on Steam lately, both from just general industry interest, but as well as like legal interest, it seems. Why do you think PC in general is seeing such a massive growth despite some of the struggles in mobile?
I just think PC and console feels like it has a much healthier, more diverse paths to breakout success than mobile does. When you look at mobile, growth is really concentrating into largest publishers, biggest games, even some of the oldest games. PC and console, there is a lot of that as well. There's a lot of legacy titles that are taking a lot of people's time and the active users for sure. But the market is still broad enough that you can see AAA games, there's still live for service games, there's AA games, there's indie games. They all can kind of coexist to a degree in a meaningful way. And that creates room, I think, for smaller teams to win with these innovative viral hits. And we don't see this sort of mirrored on mobile. I think a big difference contributing to this is social discovery. So you see things like streamers, YouTube, Discord communities, friend-to-friend recommendations. These are all much more powerful in PC and console that you don't really see in the same way on mobile. There's a real audience that really just looks for new games, especially multiplayer or socially entertaining ones recently, and to play with their friend groups. Mobile is much less driven by that kind of organic discovery. It's more, direct paid UA, established brands, existing incumbents that seem to be driving the market in mobile at the moment. So when mobile install growth stalls a little bit, the natural response, it feels like, is to double down on these existing audiences, monetize them a little bit more. The market becomes a little bit more conservative, it feels like. Fewer launches, less experimentation, and maybe less room for smaller teams to disrupt the category and break through. That also kind of feels like maybe why mobile increasingly borrows from PC and console. A lot of the new concepts that feel fresh in mobile are adaptations that have proven themselves elsewhere. But going back to PC console, essentially, I feel like there's multiple paths to success in the space, allowing small teams and innovation to coexist meaningfully with AAA blockbusters and free-to-play live service titans.
Yeah, which is interesting because, obviously they try and promote sort of that diversity on the app stores. They have their indie sections and like try and have that, that multi-promotion. But I guess one aspect of that doesn't really work very on mobile is the different business models, right? Where it's pretty much only free to play for the most part on mobile, whereas it's definitely not the case on, say, Steam, where a lot of it is paid up front. And I mean, maybe that's part of it as well. But it's interesting to see that you would think by now, if race to the bottom was kind of the strategy forward, regardless, that we wouldn't see that growth, that we would see Steam struggling heavily because it's not free to play dominated. So I suppose that provides some hope for game developers, that people are still willing to pay for games, that there's still growth there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the model of premium, the news of its death are far overblown in the past and maybe even today. I think it's really supportive a model for maybe some of the smaller teams where if you want to build a durable live service, you need scale. And if you want to just have a small team and have a paid game, you kind of don't need that many people to play the game for a long time. You just need people to buy the game at first and, maybe experience it and recommend to their friends. But at the end of the day, you sell enough copies and you're probably okay. Whereas on mobile or in just free to play in general, it doesn't work the same way.
That makes sense. It did seem like, though, that there was a kind of a little bit of a genre dominance on Steam. Now, of course, action, which was the dominant thing, is a bit of a broad category in general, because action could encompass practically everything at some point or another if there's real time play. But it did seem like there was certain trends around action, especially first person shooters or third person shooters, things like that. What do you think made action such a huge genre this year in particular?
So action, as you noted, it has just so many different subgenres from the Sensor Tower taxonomy folded into it. So the biggest games that we classify as action that were the biggest units sold hits this year were games like Repo, games like Peak. These really social viral hits that managed to really come out and just sweep through the market, I would say. Yeah, so I would say that these games really are targeting two kind of core audiences. Friend groups, content creators are the two that I would call out here. So friend groups, they want games that create memorable shared moments. The ideal game night, everyone's laughing, yelling, panicking, blanging each other. Content creators want something similar. Nuance is a little bit different. They want games that reliably generate strong, clippable reactions that will engage their audience and travel well on platforms like YouTube, TikTok, Twitch. And Repo and Peak both deliver exactly that to both audiences. Repo creates these dramatic, funny, scary social moments that make people scream and everyone else laugh. Peak does it through spectacular failure, people falling off mountains, collapsing at the worst time, that kind of thing. In both cases, the game is constantly producing moments that are fun to experience, fun to watch, easy to share. And once one big streamer picks up a game like that, loop can compound really quickly. Their audience sees it, they want to play with their friends, so they recommend it to them. Other creators notice it's good content, and then you get this big cascading wave of attention. And that's how games from small teams can suddenly compete with much bigger titles. That's why we've been seeing a lot of growth in action, and especially in indie in 2025, and in the last couple of years even, I would say.
I guess that goes back to a little bit of something that you're pointing out with mobile, which was the social strategy of things. Whereas, 4X is leading very heavily into it, but a lot of other genres seem to struggle with the social aspect, especially around friend groups, which is different than social with strangers, right? So like 4X is still often leaning into social with strangers and sort of those hierarchies that they sort of structure and develop from that. Whereas it doesn't seem like, a lot of mobile has stickiness amongst friends, and maybe that's just my perception. I don't know if there's like really any good data on whether or not people are mostly playing with strangers or mostly playing with friends in any particular genre, but it does seem like that's a big difference in terms of how social is played and the way social is structured. I mean, obviously with something like these smaller games that you're talking about, they're only a couple bucks, but they're not free, yet they're still somehow scaling socially, which is an interesting like approach where it's like, okay, well, this is cheap. Like I could just buy this for a few bucks or whatever. My friend can buy it as well. And you don't necessarily have to like all lay out for like a big 4-pack or something of the game.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's definitely, I would agree for sure that there's just a difference in how social groups approach these different platforms. I guess anecdotally speaking for me as well, I don't really recommend mobile games to my friends, even though I play them.
Right.
I do recommend PC console games all the time to my friends. And that the primary, I think, use case for friend groups is just getting on PC, on Discord together, maybe consoles for some groups. It's not really mobile, unless you're in some of the different areas of the world that are more mobile first, of course. So yeah, it's just a difference in social dynamics that makes scaling socially seem really difficult for mobile. Although I think we've seen some of that in the past with things like the Wordle, which was also available on PC, of course, and different experiences. But yeah, it seems like a completely different beast to attack.
Yeah, it makes you wonder too if some of that's lack of a social graph of any kind. Like, so Steam has built-in social, whereas I think it also speaks to the failure of Game Center and some of those other attempts to sort of build a social structure on top of it, right? Like, I suppose had Facebook been able to stay relevant on mobile despite the sort of tiffs back and forth with Apple and Google and stuff like that, that maybe we'd have enough of a social graph for that to matter. Whereas like when you go to recommend to your friend, how do you really connect? And you see people like Supercell trying to build Supercell IDs to try and sort of build these friend systems cross game and all that. So it is an interesting thing that we still this far into mobile are struggling so heavily with that. And I don't know, maybe that's a problem area that could be tackled that would benefit mobile.
Sure.
But I'm interested in what other genres as well, like outside of action and sort of social stuff, we might be seeing like as a trend towards on PC. Like for example, you guys kind of called out a little bit in the report, simulation is an interesting genre, which is also percolated a bit to mobile in a more simplified forms, things like that. What do you guys think? Is that maybe the next genre to kind of keep an eye on, or is that just an interesting data point?
Yeah. So I would say simulation, especially on mobile, is very classify Roblox. So a lot of times when you see something happening in the simulation genre, it's really just Roblox being gigantic and expanding in Asia or what have you. So while I would say that, that is for sure a trend, Roblox being gigantic and worthy of its own conversation in its own right, was that indicative of a category level market shift? Maybe, well, maybe it is, but maybe not in terms of like having multiple different competitors being able to go in there and play a little bit. I would say on the PC console side, it's kind of difficult to predict what the next big genre would be from just because PC console is really hit driven and genre momentum is often a reflection just of the release slate. So 2026 so far, big releases are like Slay the Spire 2, Resident Evil Requiem. So of course, deck building, survival horror are really spiking as subgenres. And when Grand Theft Auto 6 releases, I expect action adventure just to surge, but it's not really a category level market shift, I would say, in that. So I would, if I were to make a prediction, I would want to maybe base it just on what genres I think would be affected by some of the biggest trends we're currently experiencing that haven't really been riding the wave as much compared to other genres. So the first trend that come to mind, we've already been talking about it, is the social gaming thing. Shared experiences, friend group play, creator-friendly chaos, still hugely powerful. I think GTA 6 is going to reinforce that as well. Another big trend I've been noticing, extraction. And what's interesting is that it's not really confined to extraction shooters, I think. As well as DNA is spreading a little bit into other genres, I'm noticing. So you can see like other games taking lessons, other publishers seeing that this is getting traction, this is getting a little sticky, so able to pull elements of that and take advantage. So if you ask me what genre can ride some of these waves that hasn't yet, I would actually maybe say RPGs. They can combine social play. They can have some of the extraction elements. Dungeons have been a thing since the beginning of time. I think they can produce a lot of the big reaction moments as well that made games like Repo and Peak Breakout so well. Two examples that kind of come to mind for me personally, just my personal experience. World of Warcraft, still a huge social experience, kind of a unicorn, I guess, but just a big social RPG for sure. One that has been attempted to replicate numerous times with varying success, but still I think a really interesting case study. And another one is just even off digital games completely, Dungeons and Dragons produces, I think, an experience really similar to what you see in Repo and Peak. So if we're talking about where the next opportunity from genres, I feel like there's actually still a lot of white space from RPGs that can absorb the social and extraction dynamics well.
I think that makes sense because even some of these big action games that we're talking about that were successful, even like Arc Raiders, or even the RPGs like Clear Obscure, like a lot of this sometimes depends still on social word of mouth and friend recommendations. Seems like even if you're not necessarily playing with your friends, it becomes like a topic between your friends. Like, you talk about Arc Raiders even if you don't play together and things like that. Whereas this sort of shared experiences. So it's an interesting take on it that doesn't necessarily have to be limited to just social driven games, but that social layer still making a huge difference in terms of word of mouth recommendations. And also something I kind of was thinking about was one of the interesting aspects that you sort of brought up a little bit earlier was compared to mobile, the genre diversification. While we have these huge broad genres like action and RPG and stuff like that, there's also a huge amount of diversification in those genres that you said like can sit side by side. I think is kind of an interesting point in terms of like on mobile, if it's only a few genres like the ones that market best dominate, and then you don't get like a wider variety of games being successful. Whereas on Steam, you do get that because like success can also be a little smaller, but it also could be across a lot of weird niche genres that just wouldn't make sense on mobile just because of the marketing. You guys called out Battlefield 6 a little bit, of course. It was like a big surprise hit. And I know it's been talked about a lot, but do you have any particular insights why you think that did so well, especially against competing against Call of Duty was a big deal. But just in general, like the bad reputation Battlefield had gotten from the previous release, I managed to overcome all that to become that successful. It was a big leap for players to try and take for it to become that big of a success. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure. I noticed a few things going on for my end. So first, some previous Battlefield titles, maybe they underperformed. Maybe there is some criticism for them for sure. But I do think the Battlefield brand still has real weight with shooter players going into Battlefield 6's launch. And I think Battlefield 6 played pretty well directly into what audiences wanted from the franchise. Second, I think the marketing campaign, very effective. For a stretch, it really felt like the Battlefield beta completely took over the conversation. People were talking about how good it felt. Streamers were everywhere. Game really just built momentum, and it created the sense that Battlefield was just back in a big way. And then importantly, the game itself mostly delivered on that promise. I would argue there was criticisms for sure, and the users have come down since launch. But if you you sell tens of millions of units at a $70 price point, you've kind of already won. That said, I do think it's important to separate unit sales from durable live service dominance. So Fortnite, Call of Duty, they don't actually need to outsell Battlefield 6 in 2025 to remain bigger live games by active users, which they are. So my read is that Battlefield 6, absolutely huge comeback, massive launch, actually hasn't displaced the biggest live service incumbents in terms of ongoing scale. It's really interesting. PC console might seem even harder to disrupt than mobile in that sense. Mobile, we saw 2 new top games of the year by revenue. And in terms of top active users on PC console, it's really just the same people in the conversation.
It's interesting, especially the point you mentioned about the $70 price point. So when we're talking about a lot of these sort of fights over taking the space, a lot of it's either free to play, or a lot of these games are hitting sort of these $30 or $40 price points as a way to draw in an audience without being this big sticker shock. Whereas Battlefield 6 is not as much about monetizing the long tail. Obviously, they try to, compared to Call of Duty, which does a lot of that, through their skins and things like that.
For sure.
But it's still Battlefield 6 not only overcoming the sort of bad reputation, but also doing so at a high sticker price is a pretty interesting thing to come back from. And then on the flip side, another game I wanted to bring up that I think is kind of interesting from a cross-platform perspective is Delta Force, which is one that, borrowing the name of an older game, an older series, but like it has managed to be sort of a free-to-play hit and disrupt in that space that typically I would think would kind of reject some of the free-to-play. I mean, outside of, obviously there's stuff like Marvel Rivals and things that have managed to do well in sort of the free-to-play side of that, but Delta Force is also like seeming to have pretty good cross-platform success, both on PC and mobile. And I don't know if you want to speak to either of those in terms of like where they may be different and interesting, but I thought that was a really interesting one that's sort of disruptive without being like relatively game-changing. It's not like a really innovative game, managed to borrow from a few different genres. It seems to have found like a weird kind of general brush audience. I don't know, any interesting thoughts on that one?
For sure, yeah. Delta Force, I would say, definitely been a real success from several angles. I would say it's more on mobile, though, that it's been clearly a success. It's number 29 mobile game by revenue in 2025, number 5 mobile shooter. Genuinely strong result, I would say, for shooters being in ultra competitive space, dominated by the biggest publishers with downloads shrinking year over year. But looking at 2026 year to date, Delta Force is a little bit not as strong on the PC console side. It's not really in the top 10 or even in the top 50 by average MAU, looking at VGI data. This suggests that it hasn't really established itself at the level you would want if you're positioning it as a AAA free-to-play alternative to Call of Duty, I would think. So to me, Delta Force currently looks like a strong mobile success that has yet to find the same level of traction on PC and console. If you look at the broader market, I think that being cross-platform at the moment isn't required. So, a lot of the biggest shooter successes on PC and console in 2025, like Battlefield 6, you mentioned Marvel Rivals, Arc Raiders already, whether you count that as like an action or a shooter, of course. These are all games that found meaningful traction without mobile presence. And that said, the biggest shooters like Fortnite, Call of Duty, PUBG do have strong cross-platform presence. So it feels like it's not a cross-platform. It's not a requirement for success, but it's like more of the natural expansion. When you're a very top player, you're looking for somewhere to go, and you just say, oh, there's another platform right there. And for a lot of these top games, that it really worked out for them.
Yeah, I guess it's just interesting to me when you look at it compared to some of the other failures to try and do a cross-platform like Apex Legends. And then, we have some other ones attempting to come in like Valorant, things like that. It seems like there's this want to bring those over, but there's been pretty mixed success across those in terms of actually trying to
For sure.
have, and when you have it the other way around where mobile's actually dominating. And I mean, I know you pointed out like it's not like a huge breakout success on PC, but even like at this moment, looking at Steam charts, it's still well above uh, Battlefield 6 in terms of active players at the moment, like just in terms of scale. Obviously, like, monetization, who knows where that is at the moment, but long tail wise, it seems to be doing a little better than some of those. Obviously, it's time zone matters and things like that as well, because there's, I think, a little bit of a demographic that shifts a little more east for Delta Force sometimes than Battlefield 6, for example. So it is interesting to see that this sort of like, do we move towards sort of more of these cross platforms? So, for example, just a couple more like examples that came out, like we had Destiny Rising started trying to push on a mobile. We actually had Warframe very recently come out with their mobile release. And I mentioned the Rainbow Six one as well. There seems to be this push to try and bring these AAA shooters and other related genres over to mobile. Whether that succeeds or not, obviously, it seems more often than not that the PC version does better. So is there any reason you think the Delta Force one might be the other way around, despite them being pretty similar in gameplay?
Yeah, I think that maybe just comes from the background. It's kind of a Tencent-backed venture here, and Tencent is very much about mobile. They're very much about the Chinese market, where mobile shooters are huge. Valorant Mobile, you mentioned, released in China. It's doing quite well there, actually, even though it hasn't spread to other markets quite yet. And it feels like a lot of these shooters that are doing well on mobile are targeting more of the Eastern markets. That said, there are success stories outside. For example, in the US, Free Fire, huge growth in 2025. So that's another really interesting story to look at, a game that's purely mobile. As far as I don't think they have a PC console presence the last time I checked. So yeah, it seems like going from PC console to mobile can be a tough jump, especially if you're not able to effectively target the Eastern audiences that are able to make games like Delta Force and Valorant Mobile scale as well as they have.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I guess we'll see where the market shifts over time, and look forward to that next State of Gaming report to see if there's any shift there. But it's just an interesting trend I've noticed in terms of like attempts to do some of these things to try and capture that market. I mean, at least Fortnite's back on the actual proper app stores now after after everything that's gone down in the courts between them.
For sure.
Shift
Sensor Tower is definitely happy.
Yeah, no,
yes, for sure. We're definitely happy to be watching them again.
Yeah, that definitely helps when you get the actual like in the stores instead of having to go through the side platforms like Epic Store on mobile, which I imagine probably hasn't gotten a huge amount of traction yet.
Yeah, it's just a little bit more convenient for sure to just be able to go and type in Fortnite and get that on your phone. Speaking selfishly.
Yeah. One other genre that's been kind of interesting, to look at, of course, is a broad genre as well, is, with 4X doing as well as it has, and maybe some of the other related genres, strategy was generally, you mentioned like StarCraft, for example, was kind of a genre that was, I feel like, a lot more core gamer, PC centric, especially like a lot of the RTS or even some of the other types of strategy games that were, these sort of long, complicated games. Have seemed to have shifted now, where obviously there's still some success on PC, but it seems like mobile's actually doing almost better if you're especially looking at the 4X side of things. I mean, you mentioned some of the simplifications and some of the ways that it was approached. Do you think there's any other reasons why strategy has managed to make that sort of leap and actually maybe even a little easier for it to grow versus some of the PC side of things? Is it just people aging up don't have time for that level of game on the PC anymore?
That could for sure be a part of it. If you're, I don't know, I'm a bit older, so I personally don't have the reflexes and the clicks per second or whatever to play StarCraft anymore, like I might once have. So yeah, maybe there's definitely people gravitating to more strategy games on mobile, having a little bit less time. So being able to just do bite-sized game chunks on your phone is a little bit a little bit easier than doing, hours long sessions on your PC. But yeah, this whole jump from PC console to mobile for strategy has been really interesting to watch for sure. We do have some different strategy games that are still, League of Legends is still huge on PC for certain, but yeah, it's an interesting topic because I don't know if we're gonna see this in other genres, honestly, and I'm not positive what makes strategy special in that sense of like declining in PC and increasing uh, on mobile. Although I will say it is pretty different formulas, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of what were the really popular strategy games before and what are the popular ones on mobile now. Um, yeah, and I would say that maybe if we're looking at other genres, expecting action to move in a similar direction, maybe. Uh, in theory, you think that action is a genre that'll be able to apply some of the same lessons we've seen work elsewhere on mobile, like in strategy, things like deeper monetization, stronger social motivations, ad-friendly gameplay hooks. I think there's a path there. Although looking at the data today, the shift doesn't look imminent. Action is kind of struggling on mobile at the moment. Yeah, but I actually wouldn't frame strategy on PC consoles permanently dead either. Maybe the peak era franchises is kind of behind us for now, but there's still some subgenres where we're finding traction. Deck builders for sure. Balatro was kind of a durable breakout hit. Slay the Spire 2 is seeing really strong sales and engagement. More than half of Slay the Spire 2 players have already logged 20 plus hours, apparently, according to BGI. It's not shown the kind of post-launch DAU drop you often see. So I think they've been great game also, but they also had a co-op, so another argument for the social side of things, I think.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm interested too to see if it manages, Slay the Spire 2 manages to make it over to mobile, because we've seen a lot of those like Balatro you mentioned make it over to mobile. In fact, those who didn't catch it, Ball X Pit also recently made it over to mobile, and that was one of those sort of surprise breakout hits. That was like a sort of indie one. So we are seeing some of those make it over to mobile. I don't know if they have the same level of success on mobile, and it's more of almost like I'll play this on the go now because I don't have my like a Steam Deck with me or something. But it's interesting. I just think this kind of sort of cross pollination, and when we're talking about mobile struggling and PC growing or vice versa, and then attempts to sort of go back and forth between the two. Obviously, like we're not in an age where the two can like merge, but you mentioned action struggling. Maybe it's just lack of a good controller sort of aspect of things where no one really has like a sort of permanent controller attached to their phone. The Engage didn't take off, so we're kind of stuck with this like attach a backbone or something to it, right? And so, I mean, obviously virtual joysticks and stuff like that. There are some games that do fine, like Brawl Stars does pretty well for being a very very action real time game, despite that sort of lack. But it is also simplified down, right? And like Delta Force, as I mentioned, that's sort of thing that struggled to do on there. And I mean, I know I mentioned a couple times, but Rainbow Six was a really, really difficult game to port to mobile. So I'm curious to see how that managed to handle, because without a controller, it does support controllers. Without a controller, like you're talking about a lot of different buttons to potentially try and adapt. Whereas something like Warframe actually like adapted a ton of controls to like single button contextual controls. So you saw one where they actually like really adapted to trying to be like mobile friendly. So I will see how some of these go, and obviously you will as well, since I'll be seeing it through Sensor Tower's eyes, especially. So it's very helpful to have that kind of follow up data.
Yeah, you mentioned too, like a really interesting case study that I wanted to mention. So I think there's two really bright spots in action despite the broader downfall at the moment. One of them is Brawl Stars, which you mentioned, really interesting to look at. They had that huge 2024 arc, and then Supercell in 2025, it was more about Clash Royale. And it feels like Brawl Stars might be doing the same thing again this year. They've already seen a lot of increase in downloads and MAU, so that's another story to watch for this year. It feels like maybe this is the new thing, like Supercell just chooses a game and that game explodes in this year, and then next year will be a different one. Another game that I think is really interesting to watch in action at the moment is called One State, which is basically like a GTA Online inspired mobile title. And there's been games like this on in mobile before. A lot of them are just like hyper casual games that find more traction in like India and Brazil than in say the US. But One State has been scaling pretty significantly in the past couple of months, and it's been in pretty major markets. Like I want to say 40% of the revenue about is coming from the US. Then the number 2 and number 3 markets by revenue are I think France and Germany. So it seems to be proving out that GTA Online sort of gameplay can actually work on mobile and in Western markets, which is really interesting to see, especially since the controls are, it's not the controller attached to your phone, as you mentioned. Yeah, it kind of seems also apart because it's a very social game with that emphasizes like role playing. So yeah, it's kind of again, I keep going back to this well, but adding on to the argument that this social gameplay is going cross platform. It's everywhere, and it's not going anywhere for the moment.
Well, you mentioned this earlier and just now as well around GTA and the social aspect of things, and talking about the hopefully imminent release of it this year, assuming no more kicking the can down the road. But you said that it's likely to have like some impact on the social side of things. Obviously it's a very social game, and you mentioned the role playing aspect of it as well, which is a very interesting thing. Now that they're sort of incorporating that potentially a bit more with having picked up some companies related to that. What impact overall do you expect this GTA release to have? Because you mentioned it vaguely, but like what more concrete, like both on PC and mobile, as you just mentioned, one state, kind of maybe being something interesting to look at in that same space, and maybe even potentially, assuming there's no GTA 6 mobile at the same time, which I obviously doubt, does that then go, hey, let's look to mobile also for what to play when we're on the go? Do you expect some kind of specific impact?
Oh yeah, for sure. So just looking at the current leaderboards, I guess GTA 5 still like the third biggest game by MAU according to VGI data across Steam, PlayStation, and Xbox. Huge community. Just and it doesn't really seem to have many competitors. It produces a lot of the same moments, it feels like, as these other social games where it's just chaotic and people having fun and doing different things. But in terms of direct comparisons, there's kind of a dearth, honestly. It's just GTA. So that's really interesting to watch. And so this huge audience, I feel like, is probably going to migrate to GTA 6, assuming that GTA 6 has the same sort of experience, which I hope it does. In the short term, it's going to be a huge black hole, just taking time and spend away from other social games, I would assume as well. But I think GTA 6 is going to bring the social gaming trend to the mainstream even more than it already is. Repo and Peak were huge sensations, but GTA it's like a generational release, right? So I think it'll bring this social gaming experience to a huge new audience, and then once it's going to be, I think it's going to continue to be huge post release, but I think it'll also continue to open doors and increase the market size, increase the size of the pie for even more social games post release. I suppose you could say there's a chance the audiences will get maybe some social game fatigue eventually. But I don't know, humans are social animals. And even if this current iteration of social gaming dies out, I feel like some form is going to continue as long as games exist.
Well, outside of the social aspect of things, which we've brought up many times for a good reason, because that is like a huge trend for the last couple of years. No, it's great, like because I think it's being underutilized still, so it's worth hammering that home. But outside of that, what do you think is the single biggest change in player behavior that you saw during this last period up to this report? Because again, I think you would pick social if I allowed you to pick.
I will.
So let's pick a second one, just to explore a different area. What would you say?
This is more anecdotal. This is something that I don't have a lot of hard data to back up, unfortunately, from Sensor Tower. I think that players are getting more and more likely to hop from experience to experience. So there are these big games that continue to have huge player counts, but it's more about maybe they come back for Fortnite OG and maybe they drop off again a few months later and start playing something else. So I feel like it's more about waves. Everyone's playing Arc Raiders for a while. Last 2024, everyone was playing Power World for a while, and then maybe it dropped off a little bit. So I feel like there's more about waves, and players are more about finding the next big experience than continuing in one game and having that be their one game, which you might have felt like more in the past.
I suppose Roblox being so huge only helps push that trend, right? Where it's very much hopping game between game because that's the whole platform.
Absolutely.
And then Fortnite with their UFN islands obviously encourages that as well. So it's an interesting way to look at it in terms of like these sort of trend waves. Like I remember talking to game developers in Korea a few years ago, and one of the things that I thought was an interesting insight is how they often tend to all play the same game as a country, it seems.
Yeah.
And then but for like a very short period of time and then shift to the next one. So there's like kind of only one big game at a time. Obviously, like that's anecdotal and a little more specific to a demographic, but it is interesting that there's like sort of these demographics where that happens. It makes it a little harder to sort of predict whether or not you might have a hit or not if there's not room for a ton at the same time. But it is an interesting way to look at the market as like, well, don't expect a lot of these games to have super long tail with a big audience, but more of a a long but small tail with some of the more hardcore players. Like, you look at Helldivers, and there's still a hardcore audience playing that, but it's obviously not going to be the amount that you saw on the initial release when everyone was super hyped about it.
True. But at the same time, I think that's part of why this new release of games, they're kind of mid-level price points makes a lot of sense. Arc Raiders, Helldivers being released for what, $40, $50, somewhere around there. So they're able to make up a lot of their costs that way, and then they have the tail end afterwards as kind of a cherry on top to a degree. It's great to have, and they've seen a lot of success with it, but maybe they don't necessarily need it when they've already sold millions of copies up front.
Well, based on all the trends you've seen so far, what do you think the state of gaming 2027 looks like in your mind? Like, what's different? What are you guys going to be probably calling out in the next one, or some interesting trends that you're maybe you don't know where they'll go, but that you're kind of bookmarking in your mind? Like, I'm going to keep an eye on this on Sensor Tower.
Sure. So PC and console side, obviously, I'm going to assume it's coming out. GTA 6, I'm going to be constantly talking about that, I feel like, in the state of gaming 2027. But outside of that, I do think we hopefully see meaningful innovation continuing to come from Indian and AA teams outside of that. I think one of the healthiest things, one of the best things I personally like about the PC and console market right now is that smaller teams can still break through, as we've talked about before, and just lots of different experiences you can have there. In mobile, I do think it's going to be a lot of continuation of the same to a degree. We're going to see some more consolidation in the top games. I think Eastern publishers are continuing to take over to a degree. If we want to reverse this trend, then Western publishers need to do something different. But I think that hasn't happened quite yet. I do expect to see another genre to break out, actually. I think Forex strategy, we're looking at the revenue trend as a subgenre. The growth is kind of tapering off. So I think publishers everywhere are going to be looking somewhere else for the next big opportunity, taking those lessons from Forex strategy, but in a different subgenre. So in my mind, state of gaming 2027 on the PC console side, probably a market defined by GTA 6 at the top, but still supported by a broader ecosystem. There's where new ideas can still emerge. But on mobile, I do expect to see downloads continue to decrease. Revenue probably relatively steady, while the market continues to consolidate into the biggest games.
Makes sense. That's one of those sort of like almost boring predictions in a way, but one of those ones that's probably a little more realistic. Is to say that's how it's been. That's how it's probably gonna go. Yeah, you guys have been doing these for a while, so it's obviously you kind of see like what is the more realistic predictions for these things. Hopefully, as you said, there's another breakout genre. I'd love to see like some real innovation taking from what Forex learned and applying it to something new. Hopefully, not just an existing genre, but actually like breaking something out, because we are, as you said, seeing a bit of stagnation in certain areas, like especially Western developers, that I'd love to see remedied.
For sure. I think there's absolutely still areas in the market that are ripe for innovation. I know I talked about one state earlier, but there's been, hundreds of millions, there's games with hundreds of millions of downloads in the action sandbox genre, subgenre. They're mostly hyper casual, but they do have, tons of downloads, tons of players playing these games. And yet no one has really come in and tried to, I don't know, maybe some have come in and tried, but it doesn't seem to we haven't seen really success really until one state. And this isn't the other subgenre where people are downloading and playing games, but it's just not, we don't see a huge, casual or mid-core player coming in and taking advantage. So I hope to see more of that and taking lessons from games like One State and Forex strategy games. And I think those opportunities are out there for Western publishers or for anyone who are looking for something new to innovate on.
Maybe it'll take stealing the concept of like using the ads to sort of trick them into thinking it's a much more casual game, and then they come in and it's some other more deep genre.
Yep, I predict more of that as well.
It's worked well. I mean, obviously, if people didn't like it, they'd probably be leaving the games once they hit that point. So obviously, it's not necessarily like a negative trend. It's just kind of an interesting observation on marketing in general games.
For sure, yeah, and it's controversial for sure, but at the same time, I do think that they're trying to solve a problem of explaining what the game is in a second, and it's a really complicated Forex strategy game. So you're trying to explain like, oh, there's some tower defense involved, but there's also some progression involved, and there's a hero. And so while you might not see that exact gameplay in the game, maybe they're just trying to miniaturize the game loop and show it to players, make it instantly legible, and it's worked.
I mean, hey, do you like collecting wood and then using it to build something? Okay, well that's part of the Forex game. So like I don't think it's like a complete mismatch, and it's interesting to just laser focus on one aspect of the game that people might find interesting and present it in a different way. But I digress. It's a whole rabbit hole I'm sure you could go down, but one that I think we'll see, as you said, more of. Just a couple quick rapid fire questions, then just kind of wrap things up, keep it interesting. So first off, biggest surprise of the report for you personally? Something that actually, like, wow, I didn't expect that, or that I didn't see that coming?
I think it's got to be hypercasual's growth on mobile. A lot of the broader market trends we've talked about, it seem like they should be killing hypercasual, and yet it keeps surviving, it keeps adapting. At this point, we probably just need to accept that hypercasual isn't going anywhere, and maybe it's even one of our biggest sources of innovation.
Yeah, they got to keep innovating. So, speaking of innovating, though, what is probably the most underrated genre you think that has growth potential? I mean, we're talking about next genres that could break out. What do you think is underrated that has good growth potential over, say, maybe the next 2 years?
Yeah, I'm going to say RPGs again. They're solid on PC and consoles still, but they're still not filling the space that I think they could in terms of writing social waves and extraction waves and some other waves that we've seen. RPGs struggling on mobile for sure, which to me suggests there's some room for opportunity for a new formula there. Yeah, I think on mobile there's room for RPGs to borrow more from the Forex playbook, and there are some mobile games actually that already kind of blur that line. Top Heroes comes to mind. But yeah, PC and console leaning harder into the social trends, mobile leaning into the Forex playbook. I think RPGs have potential that's untapped at the moment.
Makes sense. It's not exactly a brand new genre, but one with plenty of room to keep growing, and people like to see numbers go up. So there is that.
Yes,
In just a few words, what do you think is the biggest challenge, though, for mobile developers for this next year?
Yeah, I said this word I think in this call, but innovation. If you're not one of the biggest publishers, it's getting much harder to win through execution alone. So you need something different. You need something new to break through.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today. A lot of interesting insight on top of the report. Of course, if you haven't read the report out there, make sure you're checking it out because it's a great report, presented very nicely. A lot of great charts, graphs, graphics, cool stuff. It's not so word heavy that it's hard to read. I think some reports can be. So I appreciate the effort you guys put into in making it a very good and exciting read. So a lot of cool stuff in there.
We put a lot of hard work into that.
Definitely. Make sure you guys check that out. It's just available, I think, pretty easily through the Sensor Tower website. And also Sensor Tower as well. Great tool, as I mentioned, something we use here quite a bit at Naavik. Very much enjoy as a tool. Pretty much, how do you compete with how well you guys are doing at that space, especially including video game insights now. So some great stuff there. So shout out to you guys for doing an excellent job on executing and continuing to grow and providing us a lot of data that helps with our insights. So it's great to have.
Well, thank you so much for the shout out. Yeah.
Cool. Well, everyone, thanks for tuning in. Of course, again, make sure to check out the report. And of course, all the things we have going on here at Naavik, including other podcasts, our digest, all the fun stuff going on. And in the meantime, thanks for tuning in. And thanks to you, Sam.
If you enjoyed today's episode, whether on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, or give a 5-star review. And if you want to reach out or provide feedback, shoot us a note at podcast@naavik.co or find us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Plus, if you want to learn more about what Naavik has to offer, make sure to check out our website, www.naavik.co. There, you can sign up for the #1 games industry newsletter, Naavik Digest, or contact us to learn about our wide-ranging consulting and advisory services. Again, that is www.naavik.co. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.